You may have asked yourself before why you enjoy staying home so much. Are you becoming withdrawn, or are you simply tired of the world? It sounds like a small question, but it leaves many people confused because from the outside, anyone who stays home a lot is quickly labeled as antisocial, lazy, or closed off. But the truth is different. Many people stay home not because they're unhappy with life, but because they've grown exhausted from constantly bracing themselves every time they step outside. You know that feeling, don't you? You go out to meet friends, but by the time you get home, you're drained. In crowded places, your head feels compressed, like there's no room to breathe. Just a few minutes of small talk, and your mind is already trying to escape back to your room. There's nothing wrong with you. You've simply reached a stage where your inner energy matters more than the noise outside. As you grow older, you realize you're no longer suited for meetups just for fun. You don't want to pretend to be interested anymore. You find that a kettle of hot water and a quiet corner at home let you breathe more easily than hours of forced socializing. And then you begin to wonder, is something changing in your psychology, or is this who you truly are, someone you've never dared to accept? People ask questions like, if you stay home all the time, how do you eat? If you stay home, how do you make a living? The questions sound sharp, but they come from a misunderstanding. People who enjoy staying home are not running away from life. They simply refuse to drain themselves on things that don't matter. Think about it. So many people spend their entire lives rushing outside, meeting endlessly, talking endlessly, trying endlessly. But how much of that actually helps them live better? Many people are out all day and still feel mentally exhausted. They work inefficiently, spend money to compensate for emptiness, and still feel lost in their lives. People who prefer staying home aren't lying around waiting to be supported. They're doing something else. They use their time to create real value. They work online. They learn skills they truly need. They invest in things that require stillness to grow. They choose environments where they function best, not environments with the most people. So, what is their strength? Focus, undivided attention, no wasted energy on hollow conversations. And focus creates value. Value creates income. People assume work only happens out on the streets. But today, what sustains you isn't where you go, it's what you create. Some people stay home and earn 10 times more than those running around all day. That's not luck. It's self-awareness. They know what suits them and which environment allows them to thrive. So the real question isn't, how do you survive staying home? The real question is whether you have the courage to live by your own rhythm instead of someone else's. Staying home doesn't destroy anyone. Living out of alignment with your true nature does. This video helps you understand the true nature of preferring to stay home. It's not avoidance. It's not a weakness. It's a psychological state that thoughtful, sensitive, and experienced people naturally enter, often without realizing it. There are afternoons when you sit in your room, watching light spill through the edge of the window, and you wonder why you feel so calm. You don't need company. You don't need conversation. A small space and slow breathing are enough to make you feel like you've returned to yourself. What's interesting is that many people don't understand this feeling. They think staying home means boredom, lack of experience, or withdrawing from life. But for people like you, home feels like a refuge, a place where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to guess what others want, where you don't have to defend yourself against the exhausting noise outside. I once had a friend who used to love going out, always laughing, always social. But as he grew older, he appeared less and less. Every invitation took long consideration, not because he was lazy, but because he had started to feel the cost of each gathering. Energy slowly drained, emotions strained to fit the conversation, the mind forced to match someone else's rhythm. One day he said to me, "I realized I'm not afraid of crowds. I'm afraid of losing myself in them." Tu right. It sounded simple, but it touched something many people carry silently. People who enjoy staying home often don't realize how sharp their observation is. They sense the fatigue behind forced words. They feel the artificiality of meetups held just to show up. They notice the emptiness after outings that never truly touch the heart. They're not rejecting society. They're simply more sensitive to what isn't real. And sometimes, sensitivity leads to silence. In that silence, you begin to see yourself more clearly. You hear thoughts that were once drowned out by noise. You recognize what you like, what you dislike, who drains you, and who makes you feel lighter. You stop being pulled by others and slowly return to your own rhythm. At home, you don't have to be strong. You don't have to maintain an image. You just breathe at your natural pace, the pace life has taken from you for so long. The outside world constantly demands a reaction, faster replies, more proof, showing up at the right time. But at home, you relearn how to listen. You stop spending energy on what isn't worth it. You stop talking just to escape silence. You let your mind truly rest. And that's when you realize the peace you thought was a luxury has been here all along, inside these familiar four walls. If you've ever felt that going home wasn't just entering a room but entering yourself, that's not strange. It simply means you're changing, not becoming weaker, becoming deeper. You start to realize that silence has its own voice, and sometimes it's the voice you need most. There's something people who enjoy staying home rarely say out loud. The more time you spend alone, the more sensitive you become to the world. Not fragile sensitivity, but awareness. You hear the stiffness in polite jokes. You notice smiles that no longer mean anything. You sense emotional layers beneath gatherings that appear cheerful on the surface. Slowly, you understand that you're not avoiding people. You're tired of what's insincere. I remember sitting once with an old colleague. Everyone thought she was an extrovert, always smiling, fitting in everywhere. But after a long workday, when the room was quiet, she sighed and said, "You know, the hardest part isn't the work. It's smiling when I don't feel anything inside." She wasn't complaining. She wasn't sad. She was simply revealing something deeply real. People like her aren't afraid of interaction. They just don't want to waste energy on empty exchanges. People who enjoy staying home carry a particular kind of energy. They don't push into crowds. But when they show up, they observe carefully. They don't speak much, but every word has passed through silence first. And most importantly, they don't need to perform. With maturity comes the understanding that not every place deserves your presence. Not everyone can understand your quiet. Spending time at home helps you recognize a truth you once overlooked. The outside world moves fast, and that speed isn't meant for everyone. Some people need loud music and crowds to feel alive. Others, like you, need quiet to rearrange emotions shaken loose by daily life. You're not seeking excitement, you're seeking clarity. You don't need noise. You need space enough to hear what you truly want. Once you understand this, people start to feel different. Loud conversations become exhausting. Forcing yourself into groups feels heavy. You don't hate anyone. You're just no longer able to live by their rhythm. And the most relieving part? You stop blaming yourself for it. You allow yourself to step back when things feel overwhelming. You allow yourself to decline invitations that lack real connection. You allow yourself to stay home without guilt. This change isn't loud, but it's deep. It's the moment you look into the mirror and realize you've always belonged to this quiet. Not because you lack social skills, but because your inner world needs space to untangle itself. And once you touch that feeling, you understand why people who enjoy staying home are not lonely. They're simply returning to their own rhythm. There's something people like this often realize earlier than others. Silence isn't just for rest, it's for reflection. When the outside world constantly pulls you into conversations, relationships, and expectations, it becomes hard to hear your true voice. But when the door closes and noise disappears, you begin to notice how many thoughts were buried beneath constant motion. Sitting alone long enough, things become clear. Why do you feel exhausted after certain encounters? Why do some relationships remain polite but no longer match your heartbeat? Why what excites others no longer reaches you? Time with yourself teaches you the difference between what you genuinely want and what you've been wanting just to fit in. I once saw someone change nearly his entire life simply by spending more time at home. He used to attend every event, every gathering, as if absence meant losing something vital. After a major life event, he began spending more time alone. At first, he felt lost. Then one day he said, "I've realized I spent half my life reacting instead of truly living." A2. It wasn't philosophical. It was the honesty of someone finally seeing the layers of dust inside themselves. People who enjoy staying home experience the same shift. When external stimulation fades, the mind stops chasing trivial triggers. You gain something rare in modern life, a pause. That pause lets you observe your reactions. How deeply does criticism affect you? How someone's silence unsettles you? Why do you still fear being misunderstood even as an adult? Emotions once scattered suddenly appear clearly, like scratches you once rushed past to avoid pain. And through this, you come to understand yourself differently. You realize many emotions weren't natural at all. Some fears come from childhood. Some habits are formed from pretending to be strong for too long. Some overreactions exist simply because healing never had space to happen. When these truths surface, you stop throwing yourself into meaningless gatherings. Inner stability becomes more valuable than any external pleasure. The quietest part of this phase isn't staying home. It's knowing when your inner rhythm is off. You slow down. You speak less. You listen to yourself more. Others may think you've grown distant, but you know that distance isn't cold, it's alignment. Not everyone has the courage to face their inner fractures. Not everyone can sit alone long enough to trace the roots of pain. But those who embrace silence often realize early that peace doesn't come from outside. It comes when you stop running, stop pretending, stop trying to please the world. And when you truly sit with yourself, you understand why the quietest place becomes the starting point for finding who you are. Spending more time at home reveals something else you once overlooked. Silence doesn't just clarify you, it clarifies others. Not because you've become judgmental, but because your eyes have adjusted to the softer light of truth. In long, quiet stretches, you begin to see what lies beneath: words, glances, and small gestures. You understand why some meetings leave you lighter, while others drain you without explanation. People may say you've become overly sensitive, but you haven't changed. You've simply stopped ignoring how you feel. Before, you tolerated meaningless conversations. You absorbed chaotic energy. You nodded through interactions that left your spirit untouched. But once you experience the clarity of quiet days at home, you're unwilling to trade it for the exhaustion of shallow connections. An old friend once told me that after a long period alone, she realized how people fill emptiness with noise. They talk more than necessary, laugh louder than they mean, and cover interactions with polite concern just to keep the peace. She said the most exhausting part wasn't crowds, it was constantly decoding what wasn't real. Her words reminded me of many people who enjoy staying home. They're not afraid of communication. They're afraid of pretense. They no longer have the energy to tolerate. Spending time at home naturally creates distance from the world. Not distance of rejection, but distance that allows clarity. You begin to see who reaches out only to escape loneliness. Who truly cares? Who wants you merely as a supporting character in their story? You don't blame anyone. You simply stop offering energy to places that weigh your heart down. Interestingly, this withdrawal teaches you what real intimacy feels like. You value conversations that don't require effort. People you can sit with in silence and still feel at ease. Relationships that don't demand a modified version of yourself. Within these few but genuine connections, you feel warmth that no crowded gathering ever gave you. And from here, you understand something simple yet profound. You don't need many people to avoid loneliness. You need a few who truly see you, or sometimes you only need yourself to be at peace. Staying home teaches you that presence isn't measured by quantity, but by quality. Being everywhere doesn't make you more loved. It doesn't help you understand yourself. Sometimes, stepping back at the right moment protects the part of your soul you once neglected. The quiet of staying home doesn't weaken you. It makes you more refined, more perceptive, and most importantly, it teaches you who deserves access to your life. There is something only people who spend a lot of time at home truly understand. When you're no longer swept along by the world's constant rush, you begin to notice very subtle movements inside yourself. Worries you once dismissed as trivial suddenly appear clearly, like fresh scratches. Emotions you used to push aside now finally have space to settle and to speak. You start to realize that for years, you've been living like someone waiting for signals from the outside world to decide how you're allowed to feel. Spending long periods alone, you begin to see how your mind actually works. Some days you're quiet on the outside, but inside, waves are crashing. Other days, you don't talk to anyone at all, yet your mind feels clearer than it did after weeks of noise. Staying home, stepping away from the noise, is often the only way to recalibrate a rhythm you lost long ago. I once heard someone say, "After enough silence, I saw myself more clearly than I ever did in the mirror." It sounds simple, but anyone who's spent a long stretch at home knows how true it is. Because in silence, there's no one left to blame, no stories left to distract you, no roles left to hide behind. There's only you face to face with everything you've been avoiding. And it's in that moment that you begin to see both how strong you are and where you're still wounded. The truth is, many people go through their entire lives without ever meeting their real inner world. They move from group to group, relationship to relationship, conversation to conversation, just to avoid hearing their own inner voice. But people who enjoy staying home choose the opposite path. They face the emptiness others are afraid of. And from that emptiness, they find something the outside world rarely offers: clarity. Once you grow familiar with that clarity, your inner world becomes steadier. You no longer overreact to criticism. You're no longer shaken by someone else's silence. You stop chasing conversations just to prove you haven't been left behind. You realize that what once terrified you was often just the shadow of old fears. What slows you down isn't loneliness, it's the weight of finally feeling your emotions fully. And you know you can't keep living by reaction anymore. You want to live by choice. This is when staying home becomes a quiet lesson. You learn to pause instinctive reactions. You learn to breathe before speaking. You learn to look inward before looking outward. You begin choosing what brings you peace instead of what pleases others. Those small, repeated choices change how you step back into the world. You become gentler but harder to shake. And eventually, you understand that the greatest benefit of staying home isn't avoiding noise. It's building a place inside yourself that no one else can touch. A quiet inner corner you can return to anytime, whether you're in a crowd or in the middle of chaos. As you grow used to spending time at home, you start noticing something unusual about your mind. It observes quietly. It remembers quietly. It connects things quietly. Out there, you often react to other people's pace, but in your own space, you finally have time to see what's really happening. You stop getting pulled into every small event and start noticing patterns in how people behave and in yourself. With enough silence, you see things you never noticed while immersed in crowds. You understand why a harmless comment stayed with you all day. Why are certain people tense your body the moment they appear, while others ease you just by being present? Why you once overreacted to something small because an old wound was already there, unnamed. Someone once told me, "The more time I spend alone, the more I realize I wasn't angry at others. I was angry at myself for not listening to myself sooner." Raiders, it sounded like a long sigh, but it was the relieved sigh of someone who finally touched the root of the problem, and you experience the same thing. When you're no longer distracted by a constantly busy life, you realize your exhaustion didn't come from the world it came from, never giving yourself time to recalibrate inside. Spending time at home doesn't make you weaker. It makes you more attuned to yourself. You learn the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is standing among many people and still feeling empty. Solitude, the kind you're experiencing, is the space where neglected parts of your soul finally get nurtured again. You begin to understand that sometimes retreating isn't about avoiding people, it's about returning to the parts of yourself that need repair. When silence goes deep enough, you see how often you abandoned yourself. How many times have you agreed just to avoid disappointing someone? How often have you sacrificed rest to keep the peace? How many times you swallowed emotions because you didn't want to look weak? And the hardest truth is this: what you did out of kindness slowly became the weight that exhausted you. During long days at home, this truth becomes impossible to ignore. It wasn't that you were too kind. You simply never learned how to prioritize yourself. And once you see that, a quiet shift begins inside. You give yourself permission to say no. Permission to leave conversations that drain you. Permission to keep distance from people who only take energy without offering sincerity. Permission to choose who, where, and what deserves your presence. Perhaps the deepest lesson time at home teaches you is this: you don't need to explain your silence to anyone. Silence isn't defeat. It's a sign that you're learning to live with your real mind. A mind that no longer wants to run, no longer wants to strain, no longer wants to hurt itself again. As you spend more time at home, your body relearns a natural rhythm life once swept away, the rhythm of slowing down, of steady breathing. The nervous system finally allowed to rest after years of constant alertness. You don't notice the change right away, but one day, you realize you're calm in a way you never were before. Things that once overwhelmed you no longer hit as hard. Situations you thought would break you feel lighter. It's as if your inner ground has become firmer. Living in stillness long enough, you discover that the body has its own memory. It remembers every time you chased others' expectations, every forced conversation, every smile you wore while wanting to leave. When the noise disappears at home, the body gives something back. Real relaxation, not the fake kind that comes from social distraction, but the kind where your shoulders drop without you even noticing. Someone once told me they finally understood peace one evening, alone in their room, warm light on. No voices, no phone notifications, when they realized their heart wasn't racing anymore. They said they weren't stressed because of work, but because they'd been existing in ways that made others comfortable. Anyone who has used staying home to recover understands this deeply. Some pressures don't come from what you do, but from how you're expected to show up. Once you're familiar with that inner quiet, you become sensitive to anything that disrupts your balance. You hear when someone speaks too loudly out of insecurity. You sense exaggeration, masking fear of being left behind. You recognize conversations that dump emotional responsibility onto others. You don't judge, but you know your system can't handle it anymore. Not because you're weak, but because you can clearly feel what drains you. Time at home helps you rebuild an inner anchor, one that doesn't depend on attention, messages, or how others treat you. It's the ability to reassure yourself, "I'm okay, even when no one is here." With that anchor, you're no longer afraid of the world. You just enter it with awareness, not urgency. When your inner world is steady, the world feels lighter, not because it's less chaotic, but because you know how to return to stillness anytime. That stillness isn't escape. It's the ground you walk on without being pulled into what isn't yours. Anyone who's been here understands. Once you find your true breath, you never want to return to a life where your soul is dragged by other people's noise. A quiet shift happens when you spend enough time at home. You begin experiencing the world on a different frequency. You stop rushing into meetings just to fill emptiness. You start filtering what truly deserves space in your life. What once felt normal, casual check-ins, conversations to avoid silence, now feels heavy. You notice how every time you force yourself into conversations that aren't yours, your mind gets worn down. You thought work was exhausting you, but you realize it was living at a pace that didn't match your nature. That realization isn't easy, but it's freeing. You're not weaker. You're simply more sensitive to what harms you. Someone once told me that after years of chasing social connections, she realized she had lost all real feeling for others and for herself. She stayed home for weeks. No going out, no fake smiles, no forced friendliness. She said, "What I was missing wasn't people. It was a connection with myself." People who love staying home understand this early. They're not afraid of losing excitement. They're afraid of losing themselves inside it. When you stay home long enough, you notice things others miss. You feel best when you're not managing expectations. You become more creative without mentally preparing to step outside. You realize your energy is too valuable to be spent unconsciously. That's when you start living selectively, choosing who you meet. Where do you go? Which conversations deserve your attention? This selectiveness doesn't make you cold. It makes you honest. You only show up when your heart has space, strength, and reason. And then you see something most people overlook. Peace doesn't come from being around a few people or many people. It comes from no longer straining to hold everything together. At home, you don't have to strain. You relax. You become yourself in the simplest way. And in that simplicity, you find a rare kind of strength, the strength of not needing to be everywhere. You know your presence has value, but that value doesn't come from frequency. It comes from inner fullness. When you're full inside, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need noise. You only need truth. Time at home teaches you that silence isn't emptiness, it's fertile ground. A place where neglected parts of you can grow back, where your mind rests, where you remember who you were before life demanded you become someone else. There's something only people who spend a lot of time at home can feel. Once you're familiar with silence, you clearly see what gives you strength and what only unsettles you. Control isn't about how much you do, how many people you meet, or where you appear. Control is whether you're still being led by other people's emotions. In quiet days alone, you see how invisible fears once controlled you. Fear of being left out, fear of judgment, fear of not fitting in. Those fears pushed you into meaningless meetings, unsuitable compromises, and broken relationships. But when you step away from the noise, those fears surface so clearly you can only exhale. You realize you weren't living by your own desires, you were living by what you thought others expected. That realization isn't pleasant, but it's liberating. You see that people aren't watching you as closely as you imagined. They don't remember every word, every refusal, every choice. What exhausted you wasn't people, it was the belief that you had to please them. And once you let go of that belief, your mind becomes strangely light. Someone once told me they understood silence's value the day they stopped reacting to a comment that had wounded them for years. They said, "I wasn't trying to stay calm. I just didn't feel the need to prove anything anymore." Where? That kind of maturity only comes from retreating inward. When you're full inside, the world loses its power to shake you. At home, you relearn simplicity. You stop overanalyzing what doesn't matter. You stop guessing others' emotions. You stop hurting yourself with thoughts of not being enough. Your mind settles because you've removed what kept it overworking. And from there, you realize something you never did before. Peace doesn't come from seeing fewer people. It comes from no longer needing validation. When you understand that, you move through the world differently, not arrogant, not defensive, just unafraid. You're not afraid of being misunderstood because you understand yourself. Not afraid of being left because you don't depend on others to exist. Not afraid of judgment because truly peaceful people don't scrutinize others deeply. What's most remarkable in this phase is how spacious your heart becomes. Not to hold more people, but to stop reacting so strongly to what you can't control. You look at life like a calm surface of water, no rushing, no being pulled by undercurrents that once drained you. This is the quiet gift of staying home. It gives you back the ability to live with your real mind, not the version built to fit in. And when you live from that mind, you realize the stillness you found isn't just a place to rest. It's where you become stronger, clearer, and no longer easily swept away by the noise of life. After living long enough with silence, you understand something you once only heard in passing. Not everyone needs the world to find themselves. Some people like you need a familiar room, warm light, slow breath, and enough space for the soul to return. The world outside may be loud and chaotic, but inside you, a door has opened. A door to self-governance you didn't know you'd been craving. The biggest change isn't that you talk less or meet fewer people. It's that no one leads you anymore. You know what you like, what you dislike, who to be near, who to avoid, and what truly matters. With that clarity, things that once shook you shrink to dust. You stop arguing to be right. Stop striving to be accepted. Stop living by others' expectations, only to feel emptier afterward. An older person once told me something I still remember. When you can be silent, you've become strong. I didn't understand then, but after seeing so many people pass through my life, and after seeing how staying home helped me stand firm, I finally understood. That silence wasn't about endurance. It was about self-mastery. Silence isn't saying anything. It's not letting the world decide how you feel. From that self-mastery, you step into life differently. No need to impress. No need to prove depth. No need to justify your way of living. Your presence naturally carries an energy people notice, a calm that's rare, a steadiness built from days you learn to stand on your own inner ground. You no longer need the world to feel complete, and because you're complete, the world is drawn to you. When you mature this way, you understand that staying home isn't a retreat. It's preparation, a time when your mind relearns how to function without being controlled, a foundation so that when you step outside, you're no longer pulled by what isn't yours. And the most beautiful part is this: you didn't run from the world. You simply chose the place where your mind feels right. In the end, silence doesn't disconnect you. It filters old connections to make room for the ones that truly touch you. Those who understand this silence are the ones who can come close without demanding, without draining, without pulling you away from yourself. And when you reach this point in life where you understand yourself, are at peace with yourself, and no longer compete, you look back and see that every day spent at home mattered. They didn't take anything from you. They gave you back to yourself. So, before we move into the ending, I want to leave you with one question, one only you can answer. How long has it been since you truly sat down and listened to your inner voice? Take a few seconds of stillness. Sometimes, silence alone lets you hear yourself more clearly than a lifetime of noise. If this touched you, leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel so we can continue walking together through deeper, more honest stories for souls finding their way back to themselves.